This is Samuel.
And this is Gabriel.
And we are here to talk today, at least as a starting off point, about Philip K. Dick.
We've been chatting a little bit before we actually pressed record here about how it's very difficult to remember the specifics of plot and character in a Philip K. Dick novel or story. And that's because the plots don't make sense, and the characters... I won't say the characters aren't interesting, but there are so many characters, and they come in and out of the story without really any rhyme or reason to them. But what matters in a Philip K. Dick novel or story are the ideas, and that's true of all science fiction. In Dick, they are better ideas than most science fiction writers.
And that's probably a lot of reason why people forgive Dick for being not like a straight hard sci-fi guy, or the fact that his plots don't really make a lot of sense sometimes, is because of how powerful his themes are. But I think that also that's another interesting thing to kind of bring up, is that there's not a lot of hard sci-fi in some Dick. Like, Android's Dream, for example, and this is an aspect that's not in Blade Runner, but the empathy box.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole like other religion, and this idea of transference of like psychic transference, and
everyone connects to this image of this figure Mercer, walking up a hill and getting rocks thrown at him.
Mm-hmm. And then it implies later that some people are the ones throwing the rocks too. But there's an actual physical pain. There's an actual, almost like a stigmata that happens to people that use it, and they can come out and they have cuts and bruises. And I mean, that's definitely outside of the realm of what some people would consider hard sci-fi,
right?
You know, but I think that he's still allowed. Obviously, he's allowed in the construction of the sci-fi genre because of everything else that he does. But I don't know. I just think that that's interesting that he's kind of forgiven a whole lot of things.
Yeah, well, what Philip K. Dick is more than anything else is a theologian. He is after God. Like, that is what he is looking for. And where he becomes really interesting for someone in an English department, or for someone in the humanities in general, is that his search for God has to do with the interpretation of facts and the interpretation of worlds. Like, what he explores are the lines between interpretation and theory, and then paranoia, and what's the word? I don't want to say schizophrenia. It's where you begin to just develop theories that don't make sense, sort of conspiracy theories. I mean, is that simply paranoia?
I think that it sounds like it to me, or at least paranoia is the beginning of, or the root cause of, some kind.
So that kind of obsessive theorizing, like his books are the stories of people whose theorizing has gotten out of control, because he was a person whose theorizing sort of got out of control. And I think he fills an important place in science fiction because the interpretation of facts and the interpretation of worlds is an important aspect of science, that move from data to theory.
Right.
And he's on the theory side of science fiction.
Yeah, I like that. There's definitely all kinds of... There's always some person, some individual who seems lost and is seeking. I mean, I can say that of God knows a ton, almost any novel.
Right.
But yeah, there's definitely a huge religious component to that.
Yeah.
I would say especially in Do Androids Dream.
Yeah.
Because there's a blatant religion involved in it.
This empathy box.
Which is, I mean, it's interesting to consider how Dick allowed for this religion to exist for humans and androids, potentially.
Yeah. So should we, for today's episode, should we talk about the books in order, or do you think we should kind of arrange all around, or what do you want to do? Do you want to talk about androids for a little bit? Do you want to talk about Flow My Tears, or do you want to just talk about the big dick?
The big dick. I like that. That's pretty good. Because, I mean, I was thinking today we can kind of let loose and just,
all right,
just see how it goes.
So yeah, let's talk about that empathy box and Mercerism.
Okay,
for a little bit, because
yeah.
that's fascinating, and it is completely absent from Blade Runner,
right? Which makes me wonder, because I've been thinking a lot about this new Blade Runner. I'm kind of worried that it'll become a nostalgia fest,
right?
Kind of like the new Star Wars.
Remember
episodes.
Blade Runner?
Yeah,
I remember.
Well, dude, yes, exactly. I mean, and who doesn't love Harrison Ford? But they're putting him so much already, like, in the forefront of people's mind when the movie's not even, like, complete yet.
So I'm curious, what do you like about the old Blade Runner? And
well, there's tons to like about the old rail. I just hope that they don't do with this. It's not really a reboot, but this like sequel. What they did with J.J. Abrams did with Episode 7, and just make it all about, oh, remember Harrison Ford? Yeah. I mean, I love Harrison Ford, but I don't want that to be the center of it, It would be interesting to see if they could bring in other aspects of the novel to help fill out that world. Because I think that world was very well done. And visually especially, and then of course Vangelis' atmospheric synthesizer music. But they left a lot out that because the Mercer box, and to me particularly the Mercer box and the catalog books for the mechanical animals,
right,
were two huge components of the story for me that helped explain Deckard.
Right.
And Deckard is explained through his relationship with his wife.
Right.
Which was her obsession with the box and his obsession with the catalog.
Right. So for those who haven't read the book, in the future of Do Androids Dream, nuclear fallout has killed all animal life, really, except for very, very rare examples. And having a real animal is a mark of incredible wealth and prestige. But then to make up for it, everyone has fake animals, electric sheep. That are identical to a real animal, but are an android, or not an android, but an animaloid.
And, but they're mechanical completely, so that you don't take your animal to a vet anymore. You basically take them to a mechanic.
Except that the mechanic advertises as a vet,
right?
So that you can bring your sheep there and have the fiction of having an animal that needs to go to the vet.
It's this participatory life fiction, which is very. I mean, it all ties into the whole idea of empathy towards others, regardless if they share your own. Man, I would hate to even see just biology, regardless if they share your own outlook or perspective on existence. Because obviously the androids, and it's about can a human have sympathy or empathy with an android? Can an android have empathy with human ideals?
Right.
Like if they can access the Mercer box or not.
Right.
But the whole idea of there's definitely a prestige value in having these animals, and prestige is very important for Deckard because he's always looking up how much something would cost. there's definitely that value, that economic model that perpetuates his progress through his own daily life.
Right. And once you get
to make sense of it.
And what you get in the book that really separates him from Harrison Ford's Deckard is that in the book, Deckard Cain is not a hero. Like, he's just kind of a schlubby guy that has taken this really dingy profession. There's nothing romantic about it. There's not, like, it's not even particularly dangerous.
Yeah.
And it doesn't pay well. And Deckard is not a romantic hero at all. There is no part of the reader that wants to identify with Deckard. He is not a big screen, ultra masculine gunslinger.
Right.
He is a schlubby little dingy man.
I think Harrison Ford did all right with Deckard in the movie, especially at the beginning when he plays him kind of deadpan. You know, when he's first at the Rosen Corporation doing his initial interview, which the interview process is a lot more intensive in the book. It's kind of funny how you're talking about how Dick talks about is all about the theoretical side of science, and Deckard is a guy who is all about. He's more data driven. You know, not just in his catalog is a kind of manifestation of that, but also his actual machine. You know, he's hooking everybody up. He asks a series of questions. He notates. It's an experiment, a true experiment to validate a hypothesis. And he stands in opposition to the Mercer box. You know, I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that? Like, what is that? What is Dick trying to say with that?
The androids. Okay, so the big thesis or hypothesis of the novel is that the difference between an android and a human being is whether they are able to empathize with another. And you are shown androids not empathizing with animals, not empathizing with other androids, not empathizing with humans, but then you're also shown human beings not empathizing likewise. And the Mercer box is this mediated empathy. And there's something suspect about it. There's something dingy and gross about the empathy that you get when you plug into this box and you, again, with everybody else, merge your consciousness in this false reality or this virtual reality of this man named Mercer walking up a hill. There's something dingy and gross about this kind of mediated empathy. Whereas Deckard does have empathy. He feels bad about having to kill these replicants who look like human beings. He feels bad about how bad his wife feels. I wouldn't say that he has healthy empathy, but he does have some kind of empathy. And I think the book privileges it over the empathy of the Mercer box.
Right. I would agree with that, especially because Mercer himself is just the guy. He's an actor, you know, and the whole thing is a portrayal. It's not anything that actually existed. You know, so from a narrative, a constructed point of view, it's pretty blatant that Mercerism is a falsehood. You know, and so participating in that is already going to be less than somebody's individual empathy towards anything else, even if it's kind of like a wish-washy, watered down, you know, empathy like Deckard's.
Yeah,
because Deckard's he's pragmatic, but like you said, when he kills a replicant, he actually feels a little bad about it.
Yeah,
but not really knowing why. You know.
Yeah. But this is the question of empathy is sort of unique to androids. It's not always at the forefront of Dick's works. What is the question of how can you tell the difference between what is real and what is unreal? What is a semblance and what is a real thing?
What is ersatz?
And there are many, many different ways that Dick answers that question. Empathy is one of those ways.
Okay, so he privileges first and foremost the idea of semblance versus reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
that's the question that's in every single work by Dick, and Androids presents one answer to that. Well, in terms of other human beings, what makes another human being is their ability to enter into relationship and empathy, regardless of whether they're a replicant or not. Because there are human beings in the book that are fully inhuman, fully as removed from the reality of human relationship and sort of empathy as a reality.
Mm-hmm.
In something like, well, let's say something like Man in the High Castle.
Mm-hmm.
The answer to the question of what is real is sort of extended from, is this human being real or are they an android, is this the real world or not? Then that becomes a question of, well, is there sin in it?
Oh, really? See, for me, High Castle represents more a question about subjective history.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, interesting.
As opposed to, I mean, because you can't have, there is no literal history. There's no force or presence that has been recording every detail since the beginning of time that we can access and say, nope, see, look here, the security camera of the universe says, nope, this happened.
Right.
It's always subjective, and I think the whole point of the High Castle was it's all subjective history, but there are more accurate subjective histories than others. Okay, like I think about this being in direct response to Holocaust deniers.
Right.
Okay, because that was much bigger deal, closer to when it happened.
Right.
And so that's how I read it. Is that, yeah, okay, everybody has their own histories. They have their own personal histories, and how they try to put that into our own subjective history of what reality, versus one that is completely fabricated and can be proven to be, well, no, that's just an error. That's categorically incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't take, there's a limit to subjectivity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
That's what I kind of took away from that.
Have you been following the show?
I love the show.
Okay. See, I only watched, I think, like the pilot.
Oh, it's good. It's very, very well done. It's got a lot of money, too. And you can tell by the second season that they got even more money. So, like, because it's a period piece. Because it takes place in the 60s. But it's an alternative history piece. Mm-hmm. So you have the 60s elements in terms of, like, set design and props and costuming. And all that is rigorously done. And the acting's phenomenal. The pacing is good. It's good tension. I thought it was extremely well done.
Okay. How does it engage with the question of what is real versus what is not real?
Oh, so they're kind of taking a little bit of a roundabout way to get to it, because they've done 2 seasons, and they're going to do at least a third.
Uh-huh.
And so you got to make it much more about the characters.
Okay.
You know, you have to.
Right.
The explanation of Well, it's films. It's like little films in this show.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like all kinds of alternative realities, and then the man in the high castle is privileged to witness them and be able to put them in confluence so he can kind of read the overlays.
Interesting.
And I don't know, they're kind of making it seem a little bit more about
So in the
parallel
book,
universes and time travel. It seems like that's what.
Oh, okay.
That's not so much, maybe not time travel, but like parallel universe crossing.
Okay.
That seems because there's a real the end of season 2 makes it seem like they're going to go more that route.
Okay.
I mean, which is I'm fine with as the show. But.
Yeah. Well, there is parallel universe. There are parallel universes in the book.
See, I haven't read the book since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And like over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now the show is so forefront in my mind. It's kind of hard to even
right. Well,
place the two.
In the book, Mr. Tagomi at one point crosses over into our San Francisco.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a totally minor point. It really doesn't matter to anybody or to anything except to Mr. Tagomi.
Oh, yeah.
But what happens in the book is that they get to the man in the high castle, and he's just a science fiction writer that has been writing this book based on the I Ching.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's Tagomi in the show.
So
he's obsessed with the I Ching.
Right. Okay. In the book, everybody uses the I Ching because Dick was writing the book by the I Ching.
Interesting.
And so then the man in the high castle is just a writer in that other alternate universe that has been writing a book like the man in the high castle,
mm-hmm.
where using the I Ching about an alternate outcome to World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a third alternate outcome to
it's his alternate within
ours and the alternate of the book.
Right.
So to sort of lay that out a little more clearly, Dick is writing a book about an alternate outcome to World War II.
In which there is another author who's writing an alternate.
Yeah, which is alternate to both ours and Dick's. And Dick is using the I Ching to write The Man in the High Castle.
Uh-huh.
He did. And it was the only book I think he ever used that particular technique on, where he would ask the oracle questions, and it would give them answers about what to do in the book. And then,
but again, it kind of like, just as a quick aside, it's like androids. It's the consultation with this apparatus that allows somebody to have a connection to a sense of beyond.
Right. Which Dick would later renounce using the I Ching. Claims that I think he calls it a false friend, like it's a flatterer. It just flatters you and tells you what you want to hear.
Well, sure, it'd be like going to see a psychic.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
You have great wealth in the future.
Right. But in the book, these characters converge on the man in the high castle's house to ask him, like, hey, what's the deal here? And he says, well, I've just been writing this book based on the I Ching. And then they want to ask him which alternate reality is the true reality. And the implication there is that neither our reality, the reality that we live in and that Dick is writing the man in the high castle in, nor the reality that the characters live in, where the man in the high castle is writing The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, nor the alternate reality that is portrayed in The Grasshopper Lies Heavy is the real reality, because all three of those realities have sin in them. There is moral failing, and reality in the book is equated with moral uprightness or moral perfection. And so that any reality where people sin is the and the sin is actually the term that Dick uses for it in the novel. Any reality where people sin is the false reality. And then that becomes just a statement about evaluating our reality to say that the moral character of people that are interpreting the moral character of the people that are constructing our histories and our science is actually the foundational question. It's
so
like
taking a non-manipulative approach to recording history.
Right. So it's like in a certain way, it's like a Foucault who believes in right and wrong.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
So that history is history and science and all these things are written and constituted, but unlike Foucault, where they are determined purely by power, and that's not really an escapable system. For Dick, where people are being good to one another and where people are empathic and loving and open, those built up subjective realities become objective, become real and foundational. Like they moral goodness supplies a being or an ontology to these totally written, totally constructed histories, sciences, systems.
This is pretty interesting because in the show, it seems like this is portrayed in a kind of slightly different way. Well, there's Tagomi is able to access an alternate version of 1960 San Francisco, in which his son and his daughter-in-law and their baby exist there, and when he enters that reality, his son is angry with him because he had disappeared and left his wife, and so they think that he's kind of come back from a bender. But he's a different person now, so he's this idea now of wanting to be good that supplants this bad idea, even in this alternate reality, this bad idea that his family had of him.
Yeah.
So it's goodness that allows him to either make real this fantasy, because it's pretty plain that he goes there. They make that pretty clear. Because and there's his, I guess you'd call him his secretary. I forget the character's name. He has done the same thing, but come to the present reality of the show from what would be considered our reality of World War II. He was in, I think it's Nagasaki, but he has radiation burns. And there's a recognition between them that they have been to that other reality. But for him, he has come here to escape that because this is a good for him. Right? Because living in a burned out Nagasaki where Japan lost the war is not good for him. Right. So he finds goodness in coming here, or at least an escape.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of... They're playing up a lot of that being able to transfer your consciousness to another version of reality. Yeah. But they haven't really... So it's films and not a guy writing a story. And the Man in the High Castle is the guy who collects the films. Which is a completely different idea, but it's so cool because in the pilot episode, you said you've seen it, right? And she's watching this reel-to-reel of New York City on
VE Day or something.
Yeah. Yeah, Victory of Europe Day. Yeah. which is fascinating because maybe it's just because the medium too is visual, and so you're seeing a visual medium within a visual medium, and maybe it works in the book a little differently because you're reading within a book about a guy writing a book. Yeah. So maybe it just transfers better that way. I don't know. But they haven't really said like who makes the film. Like there's the architect, you know, rather than an author writing this book. Finding out where they basically are saying these films come from these other places. Yeah. Interesting. Which is a very different. Yeah. It's a big variation in the story. But anyway, so like that would be another variation of basically finding that kind of explanation. Right. As opposed to empathy. Right.
In Ubik, it's a little more sort of wish fulfillment, because there's literally a spray that or a product, it comes in various forms.
Yeah, and in the beginning of every chapter, it has like a little 4-line advertisement.
There's a literal spray that makes things real. Mm-hmm. So Ubik, they are all in a virtual reality that is slowly being corrupted by a figure who essentially is a virus to the virtual reality. So things in the book, it's like, or to the people, it manifests as things going back in time. Mm-hmm. So like you're holding a cup of coffee, and then all of a sudden that cup of coffee is 100 years old.
Who's the virus?
He's a dead.
Is it the Jonah kid or?
Yeah, so is
he the dead guy? He's the young kid that's in like the moratorium.
Yes.
And he's able to jump into other people's minds and stuff.
Right.
Okay.
And he's going around eating people's virtual reality as they're sort of in their sleep stasis place. Meanwhile, there's someone else going around, Ubik, who, within the reality that each of the sleepers has, so they're all sort of asleep in this shared virtual reality, Ubik manifests as this spray that when you spray it on, say, that coffee cup, it stops being a virtual coffee cup and subject to this kind of extra corruption, and then becomes real to you. So it's like, imagine the Matrix, but instead of getting outside of the Matrix to the real world, what you instead had was a pill that made the Matrix real. Right. It's like this bizarre sort of reality from the inside out. And it directly addresses the postmodern because
I wonder what the judgmental process of determining reality versus the semblance would be.
Right, because I mean, within the postmodern, there's really no way of getting out of that proliferation of semblances, or that proliferation of discourse. Right, there's no, in Lacanian terms, there's no getting to the real. Right. There's no getting out of the symbolic. Right. In Dick, there's this like literal spray that makes the symbolic real.
Well, it'd be a different kind of real, because in the Lacanian sense, reality is different than the real.
Okay, yeah.
Reality is what the symbolic. It's like the reality is the organizing principle within the symbolic that gives us a way to make sense of the symbolic. So, like, as a whole, right? So, like, reality, it seems to me at least. So, like, the symbolic order creates reality, or right. we access what we call reality through the symbolic, which is not the same as the capital R real.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that as soon as you have, not just in Lacan, but in lots of different post-structural or postmodern thinkers, as soon as you make that distinction where you say that any encounter with reality is mediated through a symbolic order, or mediated through language, or mediated through systems of power. So anytime you make that distinction, you then, if you're being really honest with yourself, throw yourself into a crisis of, well then, have we just lost reality completely? If you make that distinction, you then undermine, you make...
the formulated principles of what reality is built out of?
Right. You lose access to reality as such. So you have to hold reality as questionable, right? Mm-hmm. And then Dick comes along in his books and says, well, how can we make it no longer questionable, right? So if you have to distinguish between reality, which we can't actually access, and a kind of mediated reality that we get through media, pop culture, sexual relationships, social relationships, ideology, or whatever. If you have to make those distinctions, then you've lost reality, essentially. I think for Dick, it's sort of an existential question. So then, what are you supposed to do? How are you to act, and how are you then to get back to an encounter with reality, which is fundamentally a mystical question.
Well, how can you get back to something that you're questioning?
Right.
Its foundation, anyway.
Right.
What's interesting about the Ubik idea is that it is a direct metaphor of that kind of interaction with that existential question. But it also really made me think about if this spray, Ubik, if it could be the process that transfers a signifier into the signified.
Maybe.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Say more about that.
Okay. So if you have a coffee, if you're in virtual reality and you have a coffee cup, right? It's ersatz, it's representational, it's a semblance, it's meant to represent the idea of something. Mm-hmm. It's only an idea.
Right.
There is no reality to it except for the fact that we can recognize it as signifying something.
Right.
But when you spray the Ubik on it, and it becomes an actual... it becomes what it represents.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, okay, we're in the post-structural sense, right? You can never truly access the signified, right?
Okay.
And it's like, there's no absolute platonic form, right?
Right.
It's kind of moving beyond that. Well, this kind of reifies what the signified can be. Mm-hmm. Or maybe he's questioning that. Maybe he's saying that it's essentially the same thing. That by calling one a semblance and by calling one reality, I mean, is there much difference between the signifier and the signified beyond privileging one over the other, which different theorists have done,
right?
You know, and is he maybe saying that it's completely arbitrary? Because at the end of the day, well, one, you're reading it as words on a page, and so it only exists in your head anyway, but you're imagining one as a semblance and you're imagining one as what it is, like what is being represented.
Right.
And so the spray kind of arbitrarily chooses, especially given that the environment is representational as well, that it only is given priority in the fact that it is no longer just a representation in a world of representation, but it is what is being represented. Right. But it's the exact same thing.
Right.
It's still a coffee cup.
Right. That's, well, it gets really interesting because Dick's sort of metaphor for his entire project is Disneyland. And the idea of transgressing Disneyland, which is this perfect postmodern environment structure of semblances and animatronics. Mm-hmm. And Dick dreams of transgressing Disneyland by going in and replacing the hippos on the Jungle Cruise with real hippos, and then like replacing the Matterhorn with a real mountain, and replacing the birds in the animatronic birds in the tiki room with real birds. And that's the kind of dream that he has of somehow there's going to be an intervention where the real of reality acts upon our system of semblances and makes them reality, makes them things in and of themselves and not just semblances of things. Because we are trapped, so that we need this kind of revelation from outside to come in. And that's what I mean when I say it's fundamentally theological or religious or mystical.
So it would be theological in the idea that you have the transubstantiation?
Yes, it's almost exactly like that. Ubik is a sacrament in that it comes along and makes these symbols of things the things that they also symbolize at the same time.
So would Ubik be the sacrament, or would it be the religious, the practice of the actual transubstantiation?
Yes, it would be the act of transubstantiation.
In a way that, I mean, like the crackers are blessed.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
To distinguish.
Because Ubik, Dick identifies Ubik as the Holy Spirit. He has this entire elaborate paranoid theology.
Just to be clear to everybody, I'm also not done with the novel. I've only read the first 60 pages.
Right.
I meant to have it done by today, but things happen in life, and anyway.
And there was no Ubik to come along to spray on the book and make it red.
Or a character, Pat, that can alternate or make changes to my own personal history.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
So the Holy Spirit comes along and makes, in a very simplistic sense, makes the wafer, the bread, that is a symbol, just in of itself, of Christ's body,
transubstantiation,
and makes it actually Christ's body. So
reifying the metaphor.
Yeah, so it makes it actually what it also symbolizes. At least within, say your Orthodox religions, and that's actually what, in many ways, separates the Catholic and Orthodox Christianities from Protestant.
The idea of transubstantiation.
Yeah, the idea that there is a movement from a symbol of Christ's body in the bread to a literal example or communion with Christ's body through the wafer. Yeah,
but through actual matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Ubik for Dick plays as an example of this force that he sees going around the universe and making semblances of things into what they represent. And it does that, or can act out that process more easily, or begins that process, has an inlet into our Matrix style universe when people act charitably or empathically or well towards each other, have good relationships.
I thought it was also interesting that when, in the early pages of the novel, one of the characters goes to see his wife who's living in half-life. So she's dead, but he can access her brain, which is being kind of kept alive. And they have this conversation about her seeing this red light that's flickering and smoky and looks terrifying, but she's inevitably drawn to it. And he has this conversation with her about how she shouldn't, that this is actually from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and that's a bad womb to enter into for your new life form, and all this. Anyway, the point is, though, he kind of makes this aside about how religion is not so flippant anymore. He's like, basically all of it's real. That it all, now that they have Half-Life, they have an understanding that there is something bigger than ourselves. And it doesn't really fundamentally change anybody's behavior, but they all believe in it. Right. And I think that's just a fascinating way to incorporate. I've also been watching, like, The Leftovers recently. Which, if you don't know, it's kind of it's this weird, strange version of, like, the Rapture, where 2% of the world's population are just gone, departed, right? So some people get really religious, and a lot of people go anti-religious, but it's people's behaviors are generally, people are behaving the same. And I don't know, I just think that's a fascinating way to incorporate a an automatic acceptance that there is something bigger than us that's like undisputable, and yet nothing changes. And
Right.
I don't know. It seems like a very interesting way to kind of make contact with that question.
Yeah.
By just normalizing it as such.
Right. Dick struggled with questions of God and questions of religion and questions of soul and reality. He never came to any real conclusions. I mean, there's this thing called the exegesis, which he has a character write about in one of his novels. So there's the novel Valus, where a character whose name is Horseliver Fat, which is a sort of translation of Philip Dick, is writing the exegesis, and he just gives him passages from Dick's own exegesis. And exegesis was this attempt to come to terms with a possible mystical experience, and he never comes to terms with it. At times, he dismisses it as paranoia. At other times, he dismisses it as the demiurge of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
At other times, he then embraces it as an actual interruption of God into his life, and all these different things. There's no resolution. So one thing I should say about Dick is that it would be wrong to characterize him as an author motivated by religious beliefs.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
He is deeply motivated
by the question of religion, not rather than conviction.
And he is, to go back to what you were saying, he does believe in it in a certain way.
And by it, you mean just something more?
A meaning? A reality beyond our reality. Yeah. And one that is fundamentally good, but he was not a religious writer. He didn't have real religious beliefs, but he was motivated by these questions of sin and questions of charity and empathy and love.
Well, as far as sin and charity go, what about in Flow My Tears? I mean, he's dropped out of his idyllic paradisical existence. I mean, it's the fall of man, right? Into a place where he wakes up, he's destitute and nobody knows him. So not only does he lose all of his material goods and his wealth, he loses fame, which could be said he loses all recognition. Yeah. He loses all ties with his fellow man, you know, with all humanity, with old relationships. It's all gone. And he has to, in a sense, rely on charity and even the charity of fate and circumstance in order to re-achieve his reality. Or at least, and then it seems like it becomes a kind of It's a Wonderful Life kind of scenario where now he's different and he can re-engage with his reality, having had this experience of kind of being lessened or emptied, maybe in a Taoist kind of sense. Why, by making himself empty of what he was, he's able to refill it in a new kind of way.
Right.
I don't know. It just seems like that's a religious tale. The fall from grace and then the reascension.
Yeah. Well, with Flow, it's also the fact that when someone looks at him and sort of gives him mercy, shows him mercy. I'm thinking sort of Felix, the police chief, kind of lets him go. That is not necessarily the cause in terms of the plot for how he gets back to his old world, but it's equivalent to that. When someone shows him love, he's able to sort of return to his place that he had been sort of cast out of.
Right. Or the way that Alice recognizes him. Nobody else does.
Yeah.
Even his ex-lover, who he convinces to like let him into her apartment.
Right.
And for a while there, you're reading it and you're like, oh, well, maybe she remembers him too. It's like, oh, no, she doesn't. It's just kind of this like strange circumstance of misrecognition.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas Alice actually recognizes him and through her own charity of recognition gives him some kind of emotional support and like, oh, I'm not actually crazy, but also as well as taking him into her home. And in a way, kind of talking about the transubstantiation when giving him drugs. You know what I mean? And there's a kind of a communion aspect in that as well.
Yeah.
The outcome of which is his ability to see the actual reality, and her decayed, deceased body is the real reality of his. You know what I mean? Like, and he's able, because of that communion, is able to re-access what was his reality.
Right. Yeah, drugs definitely play the same role as Ubik, insofar as drugs are for Dick almost always incursions of reality or alternate realities into the subject. I mean, that does interesting things for his books and his stories. It probably worked pretty destructively on Dick's own life.
Yeah,
but,
I think so.
Even the mystical experience that he talks about as being a mystical experience was instigated by some kind of drug use. I think it was like sodium pentothal or something.
Was that truth serum?
Is it?
I don't know.
He was taking it for like a toothache or something.
Huh. I don't know.
But he took all kinds of psychedelics. But you're absolutely right. That's a good connection. They play the role of sacramental Eucharists or communions in almost all of his novels. That might just be part of the times, though. You know, a writer of the 60s and 70s.
Interesting. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to go over before we wrap this up?
We haven't talked yet about our sort of overarching question of orthodoxy and heresy. And I wonder if there's even really a way to bring that to bear. I think Dick is a postmodern heretic. In that I think fundamentally he sees it as possible to get out of the proliferation of semblances and discourse to reality. And I think that makes him kind of a heretic in that sense.
Well, his stories are full of heretics challenging the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
I mean,
but not on purpose. That's always what's funny, is they're never people trying to challenge the accepted norms.
Like circumstantial.
They're usually just
heretics.
poor schlubs that all of a sudden like are now the focus of some intergalactic or interdimensional something.
Well, you could even say, and look at High Castle.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems just a flat out heresy versus an orthodoxy.
Yeah.
It's the creation of something that is alternate to what is so ingrained and accepted as what is correct that it's considered reality.
Right.
And it's a very challenge to that.
Right.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you could say, and then in androids, I mean, his wife doesn't really call him a heretic, but she chastises him for not participating.
Yeah.
Well, and then the very idea that he is that Mercer is exposed by that android newscaster.
Yeah.
You know, that is absolutely a kind of heresy against the established orthodoxy of what is the religion of the day.
Right.
There's no mention of any other religion.
Right.
You know, that's definitely kind of heretical behavior.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it totally fits our theme, but
No, I'm definitely force applying here.
yeah, that's all right. That's all right. He's just, I mean, he's a baffling and interesting writer, and I would say what separates him is fundamentally his mystical outlook. And
So would you call him a science fiction writer? Or does he just happen to write things that occur in the future?
Yes, I would call him a science fiction writer, but I have a very specific definition of science fiction
Alright.
that I think we should probably take too long for this particular episode. So maybe on another episode we'll get into what I think science fiction actually is.
Okay.
So
That'll probably work well with our next episode.
yeah.
So
Until next time.
Until next time, thanks for listening.
This was what the case of the drugged out writer.
The case of the drugged out writer and the missing reality.
Yeah, the case of the purloined reel.
The purloined reel. I like that. All right.